Welcome to this second question and answer session, which is part of the course on the fairy tales of Andersen, Hans Christian Andersen. Nice to be here again. Nice to be with you again, Torsten. And, we look forward to the next 1.5 hours. We received some very interesting questions, not so many, but there's plenty to talk about and discuss.
Definitely.
For sure. Yes. So the first question is from Jill, and she writes, I have lots of questions. On my initial reading of The Little Mermaid, I saw the author identifying with the main character in the sense that he too had a foot in two worlds, his humble beginnings as the son of a deceased cobbler and illiterate mother, and the sophisticated cultured world of high society, the world of literature, theatre, ballet and art. Like the mermaid, he wants to be accepted in this higher world. Does this view have any credence? I think this was the first question.
Yeah. Well, I think that it does, and it's really a lot of these tales of Andersen is about someone initially not being in the right place or longing to be somewhere else, and eventually somehow attaining or not attaining that position. And that kind of coincides with the biographical author's own life story. You could also say that this is such a universal movement that it coincides with a lot of people's life stories. It is a part of just growing up and leaving your parents' house and finding somewhere else, some place for yourself in society. So it might be also a very universal story that fits, or that a lot of these literary models are built upon, I'd say. But I think that it's a perfectly legitimate way of reading the story if you want to read it biographically.
Yeah, and you could back it by pointing out that there are many stories of a kind of, a movement upwards, and where many of Andersen's stories tell about the aspiration to move upwards and into another sphere or whatever. But again, of course, biographical experiences, life experiences of authors will be material for the literature they write, for sure. I think that the only danger is if you then think that one's job, our job as literary critics, is merely to kind of translate the literature back into the life, and then you think you've understood everything.
For sure, definitely.
Yeah.
It also might be worth mentioning that a lot of these characters, incidentally, or maybe not incidentally, are teenagers. They are somewhere in between the age of 12 and 20, and that is an important time in your life to go through this process of finding yourself, of finding your place in life. So it might just also be this very interesting phase in a person's life when you leave home and when you have to try to find a new home for yourself.
Yeah. The stage of life that fairy tales are about,
exactly.
Or folk tales are about.
Yeah.
As we understand them, and it was already a discussion, I think, early on in the course, the connection between folk tales and rites of passage and so on.
Yeah.
From the more anthropological perspective. So yeah.
Then
maybe,
the question goes on to ask, why would that's still Jill, why would Andersen spoil a delightful fairy tale by adding an insincere moral at the end to blackmail children into good behavior to assist the mermaid reduce her time before attaining an immortal soul?
That's a good question. Sharply put. I think you can read basically this part of the end of the story in two ways. You can try to take it kind of seriously, and then read it a little more favorably than as an insincere moral, but nonetheless as a kind of moral, instructing at face value children, but maybe readers in general, that either we know it or not, we've got each other's life in our hands. So like the Little Mermaid, her spiritual fate will depend on the behavior of the children. We've all got someone who will depend on us, on our actions, and one should try to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And that would be, and then of course Andersen has written this moral so that the children will understand it. I mean, that's one way of reading it. You could also read it as a piece of romantic irony, almost kind of breaking the narrative illusion. There was in one of the discussion threads, one of you pointed out that it could be kind of Andersen had replying to some of the critics who criticized him for not having morals in these, or clear enough morals in these tales, supposedly for children. And it's also possible to read it in the way that Andersen is again interrupting the fiction, breaking the illusion, and addressing the parents directly, kind of saying, well, look, it's well worth it to buy my tales and read them aloud to your children, since, as you can see, I can instruct them to behave themselves.
Yeah. So
which would suddenly be a kind of very ambiguous, ironic gesture.
Yeah.
Either it's aimed at the critics or it's marketing aimed at the parents.
Yeah.
And you can read this. You can, again, it's literature. You can read it in both ways, and then it's already a little bit more disturbing once you're aware that there are several ways of reading this. Yeah.
The question of the ending of the Little Mermaid is very interesting, because I've heard a lot of people saying to me that they actually don't remember this ending. They remember this story as ending when she turns into foam on the water.
Also Danish readers.
I don't know if I think that there are some translations that simply leave out.
We know that
the last lines.
That's the case. Yes.
But I think that even for Danish readers, the last part somehow seems
it's possible perhaps that Danish parents reading aloud to their children will have simply stopped the story a little before because they think it's too odd.
I think that is certainly
they don't want to sit there afterwards having to explain the child.
I think that's certainly the case with my mother, who's an atheist. She might just have stopped it there and left out the last part. But yeah, I think that a lot of people just simply forget also the ending of it, and we know from the manuscripts that Hans Christian Andersen might have struggled a bit with how to end this fairy tale, because there are some different endings, and we have all these manuscripts, so we know that this is somehow made afterwards and has been put on afterwards.
Andersen would often make revisions, and it's also something well worth being aware of, that we talked about this during the first session also, that he didn't just pour out from his heart spontaneously these stories. He worked meticulously to get them right, and often some stories for years, until he felt that now it was there, it was right. And changing the ending, it was often quite a process for him to find the right way to end a story. And The Little Mermaid's obviously a case in point. Like the story of a mother, where right up until the final version, it was all a dream. The mother was just dreaming. Woke up, and the child was getting better and sleeping soundly beside her. And then suddenly this very different ending.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Very.
Yeah. Then the third question from Jill. Does the story suggest sexual ambiguity in the sacrifice and pain the mermaid goes through to transform into a sexually mature human, or in her wearing of men's clothing to accompany the prince in male horseback riding?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if this story per se suggests sexual ambiguity through the sacrifice and pain of the mermaid, but there is possibly some kind of cross-dressing going on when she's wearing men's clothing to accompany the prince, or there is almost most certainly something of that going on. And it's not the first time that Andersen used that. In the novel Just a Fiddler, you will find one of the main heroines of that novel, Naomi, who's actually traveling all the way through Europe dressed as a man. Mm-hmm. And it creates a lot of sexual ambiguity because one of the main male characters, protagonists, falls in love with this disguised Naomi. So there is some kind of play on some kind of homoerotic attraction in that novel, at least. I don't know if that's the case here.
No, I think quite a lot of you have noticed that the prince mainly treats the mermaid like a pet.
Yeah.
A pet you're fond of. And for example, letting the mermaid sleep on a cushion or mattress or whatever outside his door during the night.
Yeah.
And then during the day, she's more of a male companion.
Yeah.
Dressed in men's clothes and going horse riding. I think, and we will come back to this question later. There's a question from Gabriela, where we'll be discussing more or less the sexualization or not of the Little Mermaid. One way of understanding this, I think, is that the mermaid's objective is to be sexually attractive enough in order to make the prince want to marry her. For all she knows, that's her only way to get what she wants.
Yeah.
Also beyond, so to speak, the immortal soul. But both these actions, either treating her as a pet or a male companion, both are negations of her as a sexual being. So I guess, read at face value, this emphasizes that the prince doesn't play the kind of ball game that the Little Mermaid wants. No. He doesn't see her as a sexually interesting being.
No, he constantly misses the point. Yeah.
And he says, "Oh, if I can't find anybody else, I might even marry you. Yeah, because you love me the most." So she is interesting because he can see that she adores him. Yeah. So again, it's very it appears inflated ego.
Yeah. It's some narcissist love. Yeah. Yes. Moving on, there's a question from Yingxi Chen, who writes, "I want to know the publication time of the first English translation of The Little Mermaid. I found one article which suggests that it was first translated into English in 1872 by Mrs. H.B. Paul, but I found Paul's translation in another book which was published in 1867, and here is the link of that book." And then goes on to write, "I am totally confused."
Yeah, maybe we can help a little bit, so Yingxi will be a little less confused. I think this 1867 publication is a collection of translations made by this Miss Paul. It does not necessarily mean that she translated all these at this specific point in time. She might have done these translations over the years, and then they're collected in this publication. I think this is the case. What I have been able to find out is that probably the first English translation of The Little Mermaid appeared in 1849, just before Andersen's first visit in England. And it would make good sense that a substantial amount of fairy tales, and some of the famous ones, had been translated before Andersen visited London and was more or less received as a celebrity and visited Dickens and so on. So it makes good sense that The Little Mermaid was translated for the first time and published in December 1849, as far as I could find out. I did not have time to find out whether this was in fact a translation by Mrs. H.B. Paul. It might have been, or someone else had a go at it before she did. But 1849 should be the first publication in England of a translation of The Little Mermaid.
A lot of his works were translated very quickly into both English and German.
And in some rare cases, the English translation was published before the original was published in Danish. That's quite interesting. Goes for 2 or 3 stories, and I think one of them being a not very well-known story called Chicken Grete's Family, which is very interesting, but I think I'll skip going more into that, because it's kind of also connected to the Snow Queen, and it's a very long story.
But do you know if he, that's just an open question for me, do you know if he supervised these translations? Because he wasn't very adept in English. And I know that in German, when they were translated into German, which he was very good at, he let, is my impression, he let a lot of things pass that he didn't necessarily agree with. I seem to remember that one of the first German translations of his fairy tales did embellish the fairy tales a lot. He called it foppish. I don't really know how to translate that back into, but it's like this dandy-esque. It was kind of, too embellished for his taste. So he wrote that in his diary, but it doesn't seem like that had any consequences, that he made that a point to the translator. So I think he let a lot of things pass when they were translated, his fairy tales.
Making a name for himself, having an international breakthrough as a writer, would also enable him to make a sufficient living being a writer. So I guess that certain things were more important than having the best or the most brilliant translations.
I think so too. It was for pragmatic reasons.
He had to be pragmatic about it.
Sure. It has created some interesting, some kind of interesting things that are not necessarily lost in translation, but rather added in translation. Because I know that the standard Italian translations up until a few years ago were translated directly from the old German one. So you would have all of these things, all these embellishments carried on in an Italian context. And one of the things was that they were made more cute than they were originally. So I've spoken with the Italian translator, and he said that the use of diminutives is everywhere in the Italian version. So instead of the red shoes, it's the little red shoes, and everything's little in the Italian translation, because it was done so by the German translator in order to make it more cute and more appealing to a German audience. So that's, the question of translation is really interesting when it comes to Christian Andersen.
Right, then there's a question from Glennis Brown, and it goes like this. The Little Mermaid statue was inspired by HCA's tale. What do you think his reaction to the statue would be, and to the sanitized Disney version of the tale? So that's two questions really. What would you think about the statue, and what would you think about Disney's mermaid?
Well, first of all, this is a fun question, but what we're going to say now, it can only be speculation, of course.
Of course.
So the statue made by Edvard Eriksen on Lange Linie, right?
Yes.
In 1913. It's an interesting statue because when it was made, I personally believe that was a very anachronistic aesthetic that was used. She's almost like an antique sculpture sitting there. And that was not what was in vogue at that point in time in Denmark either. Although we had Thorvaldsen and we had like a huge, neoclassicism was huge in Denmark. So there is this heritage from Thorvaldsen. But when the statue of the Little Mermaid was made, it could be said to be quite a romantic, nostalgic aesthetic that she was made from. And I think that personally, I think that it would actually have appealed to Christian Andersen. I think he would have thought that this is a beautiful statue. He would certainly be able to recognize the aesthetic ideals that it was made from. Whereas had it been some kind of modernist sculpture, he wouldn't have been able to recognize that aesthetic because it had moved too far away from what he knew and grew up with. And when we read his travelogues, there are several descriptions of art exhibitions and galleries that he goes to, and he really likes Madonna statues and a lot of the ancient classical statues. So I think that it would actually appeal to him.
Probably. There's also this peculiar discrepancy between Andersen's veneration for, we could call classicist or neoclassicist art, and then a kind of very modern character in many ways of his paper cuts and his visual art.
Yeah. But I think that when it came to sculpture and also music, he was very fond of the Italian high romantic opera genre called bel canto, and that's really high romanticism, no irony, pure sincerity, pure beauty. So I think that some of his tastes, when it doesn't have to do with the literary, which is kind of darker and more ironic, were very romantic indeed. Yeah. So
And the Disney version.
and then the Disney version of the tale. That's very difficult to say what he would have thought of that. Because I think you also mentioned that in the course, that this actually takes the story and puts it back in a folktale context where it's
in many ways.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's extremely valuable that we've got this Disney version, because it alerts us to the fact how strange Andersen's story is.
Yeah.
And it makes you much more capable of emphasizing this strangeness. I mean, it really highlights the absence of a final showdown, for example.
Yeah.
The way the sea witch has to be turned into an antagonist. You have a kind of pre-story is invented where she's been expelled from the court of King Triton, and she wants revenge, and this kind of logic which is completely missing in Andersen's tale, and dichotomies where many of our brilliant course participants pointed out how ambiguous the sea witch is. If you try to use the attentional model to position her, that she's really more of a helper than an antagonist, but at the same time she's quite a wicked helper, and she only helps at a very high price, and so on. Yes, the Disney version fits the attentional model perfectly, and vice versa, which alerts us to the fact that Andersen's original tale does not.
Yeah.
And what would he have thought about that? That's a very good question. But I think that Andersen wouldn't be able to do what he's doing with the folktale genre as well as other genre conventions without, I don't know how capable he would have been to put his insights into words or a kind of theory, but he's extremely conscious about matters of genre.
Yeah.
The way he can juggle around with conventions. So I guess his response would have been, or should have been, kind of informed by his grasp of the genre-related questions.
Yeah,
I hope so.
On the going back to the theme of translation, I don't see him as being very protectionist about his work, but more interested in seeing how it would fare in different contexts and like disseminating it as much as possible. So I think from that kind of logic, I think he would welcome a Disney adaptation, and then maybe he would write something about it in his diary.
Yes, since Disney is immensely popular.
Yeah,
and kind of he could take part or share this popularity.
Yeah,
there's also the vain side.
Yeah. And I think, and there are some things in the Disney version that I think correspond somewhat with things that Andersen does. I'm thinking about the animated helping animals surrounding the mermaid, which is kind of Andersen-esque, I would say, or reminiscent of Andersen.
It's also quite Disney-esque.
It's also quite Disney-esque. Yeah, they've done that from the first movies. Yeah. But I think that is somehow, there's some kind of kindred spirit with that, or some kind of some humor that is kind of similar in there. So moving on to the next question from Gabriela Teufel, who writes, I would like to know what is the meaning that the prince is treating her like a pet, the mermaid, that must be. I guess they gave each other the physical love, which is not described since he wrote it in 1837, and is it a showcase that she can't get an immortal soul from him, since there is nothing else than the physical love.
It's a creative way of reading and understanding the story.
Yeah,
I'm not quite sure that I agree, and it's of course we addressed sort of the same question in our response to Jill's final question. Because of course it could be a euphemistic way of writing that they had a sexual relationship, that she's kind of sleeping outside the door, but I think one must understand it more literally. I think it's the kind of character the soldier is in the tinderbox. I think it's quite fair to say that him kissing the princess is perhaps a bit euphemistic for doing more than that, since he's a real soldier. But in this case, I presume that, as I said, what is kind of stressed in the story is that the prince doesn't respond to the mermaid as a sexual being, and therefore she is kind of, it appears, totally stuck.
Yeah.
As far as the project goes.
I agree. I think the point is exactly that this is platonic, and that is the problem. And I think there are a lot of different ways in which you could suggest, even in 1837, a sexual relationship that is much more in many other ways than having her sleep outside the door like a dog.
Yeah.
There could even have been an omission to suggest that, but placing her there physically, I think, is an underscoring that nothing is happening in that direction, and that is the problem of that is her entire problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would also read it differently.
Yes. And we got 2 questions from Lodevik Jan Nauta, and the first one concerns the translations of Andersen's fairy tales. In the course under 111, it is said that in the library of the Hans Christian Andersen Museum, almost all translations of his work can be found, in all likelihood 140 of the 160 languages. But on the mentioned side, I could not find a Dutch, my national language, nor a Frisian, my mother tongue, edition. The only Frisian example that is shown is East Frisian, a North German dialect, which is then incorrectly indicated on the wrong map. So the first question is it correct that there is no Dutch and, in the right language, Frisian copy in the library? And if they are indeed missing, what can I do to fill that gap? I'm quite willing to donate 2 editions to the museum. Maybe I should answer this one, because I just had time to contact one of our good colleagues at the museum. His name is Einar Esgaard. And according to Einar, the museum is in fact in possession of several Dutch translations. One of them is where the translations are versified.
Oh,
very, very interesting. But so they've really been changed quite a lot. One must say.
Must have.
Yeah. And according to Einar, it's in fact a kind of a digital problem, which has caused that you cannot see a Dutch translation. And then about the Frisian translations, Einar was not so sure about that, and I think the museum would absolutely love at least a couple of these.
Yeah.
If there are different Frisian dialects or languages, the museum would be very grateful for some copies. But I think the best I can do will be simply to give Lodevik Einar's email address. So I'll do that, and hopefully they'll find out what might benefit the museum.
I think he would love that, Einar. As far as I know, they're not actively collecting in order to get all translation there is in the world, because I think that new ones appear on a weekly basis. So that would be a full-time job, if not even more laborious. But they do have at the museum a large library where you can find all of these amazing translations and adaptations and comic books and all kinds of genres that Andersen's work has been translated into or adapted into. So I think he would certainly welcome a Frisian edition.
Yes. And then
the next question.
Yeah. It's about a tale called The Jewish Girl. In 1855, Andersen wrote The Jewish Girl, apparently a strange duck in his literary pond, and I will tend to agree. In his PhD thesis, Edward Sanders calls it a typical Protestant conversion story, and Albert Verwey wrote in 1888 that this narrative of Andersen is a sob story of sentimental feelings and misguided morality. On your site, and that's really the site developed years ago by, you could say, the old center. I found, I'm going to quote, Andersen balances in this story tactfully between his own faith and the respect for the faith and the promise described, and there's a link. However, on Livre d'Or, the story is described as, and this is I think a home page where a Jewish person is writing about representations of Jews in literary works. It is, according to the Livre d'Or, the most terrible fairy tale you could ever imagine, and Andersen is accused of having anti-Semitic views. So the second question goes, can you provide some background information and explanation concerning this story? Andersen's possible intentions, how does it fit into the totality of his work? Do you think it is a true conversion story characterized by sentimental feelings and misguided morality? And how would you refute the accusation of anti-Semitism?
I don't know that, for those not familiar with the Jewish girl, if we should just bring a brief explanation of the story.
We certainly got the time to
do it. So this story, which is not very well known by Hans Christian Andersen, is the story of a young Jewish girl who, from she is very young, gets acquainted with
in school.
She is exempted from Christianity in the Danish school she is going to.
Simply because she's too interested.
Yeah. She's too interested. Her father promised her deceased mother that he would never allow her to convert to Christianity. However, this girl gets more and more interested in Christianity as she grows up. And I just read it, but she asks her father and is repeatedly told that she cannot take an interest in this, and he promised her mother that he wouldn't let her convert into
her father, it appears, is not that religious.
Yes, he says, I don't know much about our faith, but your mother was very devout, and I need to keep my promise to her. So for the sake of her, I will keep my promise and not let you do that. So the story ends with the father dying, and this woman never converts to Christianity.
No, but then it appears she moves to Jutland, and she becomes a kind of maid, a servant in the house of, not that wealthy family, just wealthy enough to have a maid.
Yeah.
And then the husband dies, and she takes care of the widow, and finally she has to read aloud from the New Testament. This is the one book she has not read.
Yeah.
But she's read a story about an Hungarian ruler and a Turkish pasha, which thematizes Christianity as the religion of forgiveness. So Islam is in fact present as well. Thanks to this historical novel. But it's like you're reading aloud from the New Testament. Finally, it kind of it is as if an inner conversion, final conversion, takes place inside her, and she dies, but she's buried outside the churchyard. As a non-Christian would be buried.
And then the story ends with the narrator saying that God's good sun is shining both on the tombs inside the graveyard and outside the graveyard. Yes. So, well, I do believe, I don't know that there is, I don't know if there is a genre called a conversion story, but I would definitely say that this is a conversion that takes place through this story, an inner conversion.
Therefore you could probably say that it's more Protestant than anything else. So yes, you could read it as a Protestant conversion story. I think so. And therefore it's difficult to position it in Andersen's oeuvre because it doesn't really fit in.
No. No, I think it's quite an exception in his in the totality of his work, as you write, Ludovic.
It's a strange doc, and why did he feel he had to write this specific story in 1855? I don't know.
No.
We've got this we've got this, and you've worked quite a lot with this novel, To Be or Not to Be, and we've got this very strong character, very favorably depicted character, Esther, Jewish woman.
Yeah.
And it is from 59.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So more or less the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as I said, I don't know why Andersen felt the need to write this story. But then, once it's there are of course several ways of reading it. I mean, there's no doubt that it champions Christianity, and you cannot read it without getting a message from it that Christianity is the superior religion when you compare it to the Jewish religion, and the Jewish faith, and to Islam, because it's the religion of forgiveness.
Yeah.
Forgive your enemies, and the other religions do not teach you that.
Yeah. Very like that.
But then, what else does the story say? We discussed also in the last set question Andersen's faith, his relationship to religion, and I think what we said and what we can repeat is that this has always been discussed and no consensus has been reached, and probably no consensus will ever be reached, because the kind of how can you put it, that the material is contradictory, pointing in many different directions. And certainly Andersen used many of his stories to ask questions and experiment with points of view that had to do with questions, issues relating to faith, and especially the Christian faith. But in a much more experimental and ambiguous way than this story. But I still think this one way of reading this story more favorably would be, for example, the narrator says at a certain point, which day you have your Sabbath, God probably will not care. And the sun will shine on the graves inside the churchyard as well as outside. So one way of reading it is that all religions or all faiths answer to or relate to the same God, and he doesn't care about days in the week or locations on one or the other side of the wall. But still, there's this thing about Christianity being the religion. So there is a kind of Christianity is favored, a champion in this story in a way that you don't really find in a similar fashion anywhere else.
No. On the contrary, as the novel I mentioned before, Just a Fiddler, also has a very strong Jewish heroine, Naomi, who is also, throughout the novel, she has some very strong critiques of the Danish nationalism that was on the rise in the 19th century. So I think that these strong female Jewish characters are also sometimes used as this cultural side glance to try to look at the Danish society from outside, theologically and ideologically. And I think that he is empowering these positions a lot by using them in this way. So I wouldn't necessarily refute this story as a true conversion story, but I would refute this if it's a general accusation of anti-Semitism. I would say that you have to read a lot of other works in order for that to be nuanced, because I don't think that's the case. I also think that we have to remember what kind of ideological climate this was in the 19th century, where anti-Semitism was very, very widespread. So to write about Judaism in this way might be in this intellectual climate of the 19th century might be seen as steering away from the common notion or sentiment in the daily society at that point in time. So I don't think that he was anti-Semitic.
I think it's because Andersen has written a poem which has been turned into a song, which you could say is the unofficial national anthem of Denmark. And he was deeply saddened by the war with Germany.
In 1864.
Yes. And partly because he had, of course, had many German friends. And of course he would kind of take sides, the Danish side in this conflict, but he was so sad that it was taking place, and I think nationalism, as you say, it was completely alien to him. His impulses were kind of, what would you say, universalist, pan-European, and nationalism had no intellectual appeal to him whatsoever.
No, definitely not. Absolutely not.
And also stereotypes about other people or cultures.
Yeah,
you don't find them.
No. On the contrary,
I think he at this point in time in Copenhagen, he would be one of the least anti-Semitic people you could find. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that he is, of course, a product of time and age and culture, which is somehow basically anti-Semitic.
Yeah. But when it comes to the question, of religion, I think he favors Protestantism and also champions it in this way. But I think it has more something to do with in the travelogue, A Poet's Bazaar, he arrives in Rome at some point, and he also makes a critique of Catholicism for being too focused on external things. He gets seduced by the pomp and circumstances surrounding the Catholic rituals and holidays. And getting carried away with the pomp and circumstances, he checks himself and says, this perhaps all these externals showcasings of piousness is directing my attention somewhere where it shouldn't be when it comes to religion. I need to focus back on the inner feeling, the inner religious faith. So I think he was very skeptical towards religion that is based on rituals or external shows of piety. And that's, you could say, that's a very Protestant way of looking at it, that it's all about the inner faith, and that is the primary, and secondary you have all the external rituals. And
then one thing we could say about the Jewish Girl, which can kind of position it within Andersen's authorship, is that it's one of many stories, also like a story from the Dunes and others, where some kind of epiphany or conversion is taking place inside a main character, and it coincides with the death of this character. So it's all the Red Shoes.
Yes.
Where, of course, Andersen's relationship to religion will be a huge theme.
Exactly. Yes. But this might also connect with some of you were wondering when it came to the question of the spectre and the riddle and the traveling companion, why Andersen would let the church be demolished, why there would be pagan elements connected to the church. And I think that is also because the church as a physical place is not necessarily sacred in Andersen's view.
What are we talking about? The riddle, or about when we say the church is kind of desecrated? Isn't that in the riddle?
Oh, I can't remember exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I don't think in the traveling companion and in the spectre, the dead, at least in the traveling companion, the deceased person who becomes the helper, the companion, is lying inside the church, and the two vile persons kind of try to desecrate the body inside the church.
Yeah. Okay.
So something not very nice is taking place inside the church.
Yeah.
But it's much more remarkable what goes on in the riddle.
Yeah.
But then that's a folk tale.
Yeah. That's a folk tale. So, should we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Which is a question by Janet P, who asked. Actually, there are 3 questions.
So we'll take them one at a time again. Yeah.
In 5.10, we are informed about the Snow Queen fairy tale that Andersen's intention was to fictionalize or to allegorize a basic idea to show sensibility's victory over cold reason. So what motivated Andersen to choose this particular idea?
That's a good question. Again, I think they kind of relate to each other. Janet's 3 questions, they all have to do with the Snow Queen, and again, religious themes are very central to this tale, and it also appears to champion the Christian faith, and especially, as we say in Danish, barnetro, the kind of unreflected, immediate faith felt by a child. And of course, the saying that if you cannot become like little children, you will not enter into the kingdom of God is very important. These words from Jesus, and the idea that being as a Christian, you should realize how dependent you are on God, just like a little child depends totally on its parents, and so this kind of child position as a person of the Christian faith, as a believer, appears to be what the story champions. And then this kind of faith is not just sensibility, it's this kind of faith which kind of wins or defeats cold reason. Cold reason being somehow represented by the Snow Queen, who also represents, I guess, some kind of dark eroticism. But so she's not just cold reason, but that's what she is. She's reduced Kai to merely being cold reason. And so the whole story is one grand Christian allegory in some sense. What motivated Andersen? I think it's again, my reading of the tale is that it's kind of also a grand gloss or comment to the passage from Paul's letter to the Corinthians. And what Paul is saying, writing, is that here on this side of death, we only know in parts, but once we get to the other side after death, we shall know fully, completely. But to know in parts can be understood in 2 ways. It's simply that there are limitations to our knowledge and insight, as we being the finite beings that we are. Or if you, and this is not what Paul is thinking of, but you could also say that if you really exercise your cold reason, if you're really analytical, you also want to know in parts because you want to take things apart in order. That was etymologically, that's what it means to analyze. And so the analyst merely takes things apart, and he will be very clever. He can say that what do they consist of, but can he put them back in place and make it work again? One could say. So the analytical faculty just splits things apart, and that's cold reason. This is what Kai has been reduced to, and Andersen's absolute. I mean, one of the many magnificent details in the story is the name in Danish. This task Kai has been given, this game he has to, or puzzle he has to solve, that the Snow Queen has given him. He has to spell the word eternity, but as long as he is cold reason, he can't, of course, arrange this word. But what's the name of the game? It's called, in the English translation, the Ice Game of Reason. But in Danish, forstans is spil. You can hear it breaks apart, it splinters, the name. Yeah. And that's the level Andersen is operating at. Yeah. And I'll say no more.
So, well, wow. The second question is then, why is it said to be a highly self-conscious tale? Apart from his childhood garden, what other experiences or reflections from his own life has he drawn upon in The Snow Queen? And if I might start answering that, I think that what is meant by a highly self-conscious tale is not necessarily that Andersen is conscious of himself through this tale, but that the tale is conscious of itself as a tale. And that is also what's called when being meta-poetic in a tale, or meta-literature. So when
there's a link to romantic irony.
Exactly, yeah. It is when a piece of narrative, when a narrative is commenting on itself as a narrative. So that is when the question of fiction or narrativity itself is somehow thematized or reflected within the actual. So you will find it in works where people are suddenly reading some kind of fiction in the artwork, and that is. The art of storytelling. I think that is your point here, right? That the art of storytelling is essential to this fairy tale. The fairy tale will several times talk about the art of storytelling, and Gerda continuously has to tell her story in order to move along through the story.
Yeah, that's one aspect of the self-consciousness of the story, which is, of course, kind of this is the stakes are very high when it comes to this story, because it's so very brilliant and sophisticated in its championing of this immediate innocent faith. Yeah, and it's so aware of itself that it's so far from being innocent. Yeah. In a simple sense, the story, and this is the balancing act, which is the Snow Queen. Yeah, and in that sense, it's as such a balancing act. It's a masterpiece, in my humble opinion. To return to St. Paul, it's also a story, and it's specifically stressed that this tale is in parts. A fairy tale in 7 stories, and do they then make up something which is complete and full? That's the question. And each story, as a part in itself, is in danger of ending in a short circuit on Gerda's part. She's stuck. She cannot continue her quest, and as you mentioned, then she tells her story. She tells the story so far. That way she awakens sympathy. Someone decides to help her, and she can continue. But towards once she's rescued Kai, the story could have stopped there, but they of course have to return home and to the very same home.
Yeah.
But that will be discussed next week, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the point is, on their way back, they meet the little rubber girl again, and several significant things happen. But one thing which happens is that the little rubber girl can then tell about Prince and Princess and the crows and so on. So it's like at this point, when they go back, the story is also playing itself backwards. And thereby it's kind of affirmed joyously that this story in 7 parts has become whole and full and complete.
Like the puzzle.
Yeah.
It's very...
And that's this kind of self-consciousness.
Yeah.
That's what the word as it is used refers to this aspect of tale. The way it knows itself. I would say as good narcissism, and we've got bad narcissism in the Narcissus, who can only say, I can see myself, and then she's trying to tell her story or sing her song about this little dancer with one leg up in the air and so on, standing on one, not leg, but stem. So this is the narcissist, the flower, who cannot tell a story with any kind of poetic, artistic distance. So the leg becomes a stem, like what she's kind of standing on. So another brilliant little detail.
It is overall, as you say, very, very sophisticated and very, very self-conscious, the story of what it's doing all the time. It's brilliantly balanced, and I think it's genius to make such a carefully orchestrated the art is to make such a carefully orchestrated plot seem so effortless, and to make it a story about childish naivety is really also a great contrast, I find.
Yes, and then the third question from Janice, and it's still about the Snow Queen. Are there identifiable caricatures? For example, are the time-wasting flowers? Yes, and that's really their function in the story. Simply to delay. Or the newspaper-reading princes, satirical portraits of real personalities in Danish society? It's a good question. And a very brief answer would be then maybe, probably, but if they are, we have no knowledge about the specific persons.
It might be, but I don't think that the fairy tales are the ones where Andersen is most overt in his caricatures. And
I think his novels surely contain caricatures of people we can point out. Like in his late short novel or novelette, Lucky Per, Lucky Per. The main character, Per, in his youth, has to go to boarding school. It's Andersen's own time in the hamlet of Slagelse. The grammar school he had to, which was also a boarding school. He spent a couple of years there. He hated it, and he is kind of only as a 70-year-old person, something like he's been 60 at the age of must be 65. He has managed to obtain the ironic distance, so he can playfully let his main character go through such a grammar school experience, with the headmaster being obviously Andersen's own headmaster, Meisling from Slagelse.
And at other times in some of the novels, he will comment directly on current events and mention people by their names. And this is, I can't remember if it's in OT perhaps, where there has been, or maybe it's in To Be or Not To Be, there has been this very weird publication in Denmark at that point in time, Gengangerbrevene, the letters from a ghost. I don't know how to exactly translate it. but it was allegedly a posthumous publication by a deceased critic, which was very critical towards things in Danish literary society at that point in time. And that takes up a lot of space in that novel, and the characters are discussing this piece of fiction that has just come out. And also in his debut novel, Journey on Foot, he's also mentioning a lot of people, but they are mentioned by their actual names, and he makes no effort to conceal who he's talking about. So it might be a reference to some person here in The Snow Queen, but it's very indirect. I think he made a conscious effort to make them as universal as possible, and not to kind of fix them to a cultural or context, or a Danish context.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that the flowers, in fact, I'm not sure they refer to given people. I think Andersen knew very much about kind of emblematic, symbolic meaning attached to flowers, and and that's also a kind of emblematic, allegorical background knowledge, whatever you want to call it. He's drawing upon that when writing the songs of the specific flowers in the garden. So it's in fact what they say are more related to that emblematic, allegorical luggage, so to speak. I think that's what they reflect, and not any given persons.
No.
So yes, that's and then there's a final question from Alison Kelman. I wonder if the educators will be kind enough to comment on the absence of names for the characters in H.C. Andersen's The Little Mermaid. I believe that this contributes to the universality of the story and adds another layer of meaning. In many ways, it reminds me of a medieval miracle play.
I think that is a very good question, and I think I would agree that it contributes to the universality of the story, but it is an interesting question why she doesn't have a name, because a lot of the other female protagonists do have names.
Yes.
And are not just called the little girl, for instance.
No, Thumbelina, which is a kind of nickname, Gerda in The Snow Queen, Elisa in The Wild Swans.
Exactly.
So she is a kind of a... The soldier has no name in Tinderbox, whereas we've got your Andersen traveling companion.
And if they don't
the
have...
Man in the Shadow hasn't got a name. The Shadow hasn't got a name. It's... in some cases, you find the characters, and also main characters, they do have names, and in other cases, not. Can you identify a kind of logical system?
I'm not sure. I think it might have something to do, but this is just a hypothesis. The fact that she is not quite human. I think that the story wants to perhaps underline, whenever it mentions her, that she is a mermaid. Whereas if she had a name, that would kind of make her very anthropomorph, and you might forget that she is a mermaid. So I think there might be a point in stressing the fact that she is somewhere in between human and animal by underlining the mermaid status again and again.
Yeah, and does it follow from that? And then the prince cannot have a name. She's a mermaid. Hasn't got a name for that reason.
No, and yeah.
Good question.
It's a puzzling question, and also the sea witch is also just called the sea witch, and doesn't have a name.
I think it's you can kind of recur to not having names for characters in the fairy tale genre. I think it's a fairy tale genre trait that Andersen will employ when he feels that will serve his purpose in the best way. And there's another fairy tale element that he very often uses and gets away with. The fact that you can just state that something is like this and this in a fairy tale, and you don't have to explain why. I mean, like in the Wild Swans, what the metamorphosed brothers of Elisa, why have they gone to this country across the ocean? You get no explanation whatsoever. That's just the case. And that's what you can do in the fairy tale genre. Certain things are just what they are, they're just the case. And since you know this is a fairy tale, you don't expect an explanation or kind of logical connection or anything. And Andersen is also an expert at exploiting that aspect when it suits his purpose.
Yeah, because my follow-up question would be, and I don't have an answer to this either, why the diminutive? Why is she little? Why is it not just the mermaid?
And I think it's a way of also creating sympathy that Andersen will use. I think the diminutive is even more marked, conspicuous in Thumbelina, for example. So, and honestly, instead of little, because Johannes is not little, but then it's poor Johannes, who lost his father. So, it's kind of either diminutives or an adjective like poor. Andersen will use that in some stories in order to create sympathy for the main character.
Like the little match girl, who's also little.
Yes.
Which is underscored. However, concerning the name of, or the missing name of the Little Mermaid, I seem to recall that you at one point told me that you actually liked the name that Disney chose for her.
I kind of sense an irony there.
Not
because they've chosen the name Ariel, and Ariel is in fact a kind of spirit of the air in The Tempest by Shakespeare. So Andersen's the end to the story that Disney, of course, had to change completely, and we get this first and final showdown, and then the happy marriage, and they lived happily ever after, and so on. The completely, to Disney, useless ending Andersen chose for his original story is ghostly present, because the name of the daughter of, the name of the mermaid is Ariel. His spirit daughter. Boy, girl. Spirit of the air. And a medieval miracle play, yes. But I also think maybe that's more literally that the Wild Swans will also remind you maybe of a medieval miracle play. And there you have, as I have mentioned, characters with names. At least you've got the main character, Elisa.
I haven't really thought about that, so I don't think I have anything to add to that.
Right.
Yes.
Have we? Did we get to the end?
I think we did.
And do we know a little more?
I think I do. At least these, I've gotten a lot to think about. At least those were some very interesting questions that you've sent to us. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, and enjoy yourself during the rest of the course. We look forward to joining you all the way to the end.
Definitely. Thank you.